The summer heat clung to the air like a second skin in the small town of Cedar Falls, Ohio. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone's business, and gossip traveled faster than the police cruisers that rolled down Main Street. Officer Daniel Harris was one of the most recognizable faces in town. At 37, with a lean frame hardened by years of service, a trimmed beard, and a gaze that could shift from warm to intimidating in seconds, Daniel was both respected and feared. For years, Daniel had been the picture of stability, serving the force with honor, coaching Little League in his spare time, and coming home to a modest White House on Elmwood Avenue where his wife, Emily, waited with dinner on the table. They had been married for almost a decade, a love story that started back in high school when Daniel was the quiet athlete and Emily was the girl with the bright laugh that could turn heads across a crowded hallway. But under the surface of their marriage, things had begun to fracture. Emily, now 32, had always dreamed of something bigger than Cedar Falls. She had studied art in college, only to put it aside when she married Daniel, who wanted a steady life close to his aging parents. Emily tried to settle into her role as the supportive wife, but over the years she began to feel caged. The small-town whispers, the endless nights alone while Daniel worked overtime shifts, the creeping feeling that she was fading into a version of herself she didn't recognize, it all weighed heavily. By the spring of 2021, their arguments became louder, sharper. Emily accused Daniel of being emotionally absent, of pouring himself into the badge instead of her. Daniel, on the other hand, grew tired of what he called Emily's restlessness, her constant longing for something he couldn't give. Their fights escalated, sometimes spilling into public spaces where friends and neighbors exchanged knowing glances. Then came the breaking point. Emily filed for divorce that summer. The news hit Cedar Falls like a thunderclap. Nobody could believe it. The town's golden couple, splitting after so many years. People whispered at diners, at the church pews, at the grocery aisles. Some blamed Daniel's obsession with work, others hinted that Emily had been seen too often at the coffee shop with a stranger who had recently moved into town, a man with an expensive car and a too-easy smile. The divorce finalized in early fall, swift and clean on paper but brutal in reality. Daniel moved into a small apartment near the station, leaving Emily in the house they once shared. She didn't seem broken by the separation. Instead, she looked lighter, as though a weight had lifted. But Daniel, he carried his pain like a badge under his uniform, hidden but heavy. Months later, the real shock began to unfold. Word spread that Emily was pregnant. At first, no one thought much of it. Divorces were messy, people moved on. But when details slipped that she wasn't just pregnant, she was carrying 5 babies, the whole town reeled. Cedar Falls buzzed with speculation. Some insisted the children must be Daniel's. After all, he had been her husband for years. Others raised eyebrows, recalling the man from the coffee shop, the whispers of late-night visits, the unfamiliar car parked discreetly on Elmwood Avenue. Daniel heard it all. Each rumor was another wound. He hadn't spoken much to Emily since the divorce, their interactions limited to paperwork and strained nods in public. But hearing she was expecting 5 children shook him to his core. He couldn't help but calculate timelines, replaying their final months together, wondering if those children might carry his blood, or if the betrayal was deeper than he ever feared. Still, Daniel didn't confront her. Not yet. He threw himself into work, burying his doubts under piles of reports and late-night patrols. But the truth had a way of clawing through silence, and when Emily finally gave birth at St. Mary's Hospital, the whispers exploded into a roar. The hospital waiting room filled with townsfolk, some out of genuine concern, others out of morbid curiosity. 5 healthy babies, 2 boys and 3 girls, were delivered after a grueling labor. Emily lay in her hospital bed, exhausted but glowing, surrounded by nurses who marveled at the rarity of quintuplets. Daniel stood outside her room, unsure if he should enter. He wasn't her husband anymore. He had no claim, no right. Yet something inside him ached to see the children, to know the truth for himself. When he finally stepped in, Emily's eyes flickered with a mix of shock and guarded emotion. For a long moment, neither spoke. Daniel's gaze drifted to the bassinets lined up beside her bed, 5 tiny lives wrapped in blankets, their cries filling the air like a haunting chorus. His chest tightened. Were they his? Or was he standing in the room of the ultimate betrayal? Emily broke the silence first. You don't have to be here, Daniel. Her voice was tired but steady. He swallowed hard. I needed to see for myself. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and something unreadable flickered in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or guilt. But before he could ask the questions burning in his chest, a knock at the door interrupted them. A man stepped in, dressed sharply in a tailored coat, his dark hair slicked back. The stranger from the coffee shop. He walked straight to Emily's side, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. You did amazing, he whispered, leaning down to kiss her forehead. Daniel's stomach dropped. His fists clenched. This was confirmation of everything the town had whispered. Emily had moved on, and this man, this stranger, was now standing where Daniel once belonged. The man turned, meeting Daniel's glare with calm confidence. I don't think we've been formally introduced. I'm Mark. His tone was polite, almost smug. Daniel gave a curt nod, his jaw tight. Daniel, her husband. He stopped himself, correcting with bitter precision, ex-husband. Mark's smile barely shifted. Right. Well, I'm here now. And these kids, he glanced at the bassinets, his hand still resting possessively on Emily's shoulder. They're my responsibility. The words hit Daniel like a gunshot. Emily closed her eyes, tears threatening to spill. She didn't deny it. She didn't explain. The silence spoke volumes. Daniel left the room without another word, his heart pounding with betrayal, confusion, and something darker he couldn't name. He had spent years dedicating his life to his marriage, to his wife, to protecting their future. And now, in the span of months, everything had been ripped away. But Cedar Falls wasn't done with the Harris family story. Not by a long shot. Because just as the town settled into its judgment, just as people began to accept the narrative that Emily had moved on and built a new life with Mark, small cracks began to appear in the story. The first came when a nurse, gossiping to a friend, let slip that something unusual had shown up in the baby's medical records. Nothing dangerous, just curious. The second came when an old friend of Daniel's in the department mentioned that Mark wasn't who he claimed to be, that his past was murkier than his polished smile suggested. And the third was the one that kept Daniel awake at night. Because as he replayed the moment in the hospital, standing over the bassinets, he couldn't shake the feeling that at least one of those tiny faces looked achingly familiar. Too familiar. The weeks after Emily's delivery passed like a storm cloud hanging over Cedar Falls. Everywhere Daniel went, he felt eyes on him. At the gas station, people whispered behind shelves of chips. At the diner, waitresses gave him pitying smiles, as if he were a widower instead of a divorced man. Even in the squad car, patrolling familiar streets, he caught himself glancing into shop windows and imagining the conversations happening inside. Everyone thought they knew the truth. Emily had moved on. She'd found another man. And those 5 babies, well, Daniel had been written out of their story before it even began. But Daniel couldn't shake it. Not the way one of the infants had tiny, almond-shaped eyes that mirrored his late mother's. Not the faint dimple on another child's cheek, the same spot Daniel's father had once teased him about. Genetics were cruelly precise. What were the chances that Mark, a man who'd appeared out of nowhere, had produced children who carried echoes of Daniel's bloodline? He tried to ignore it. He tried to swallow the questions and carry on. But one night, after a long shift, Daniel sat in his dark apartment staring at a glass of whiskey and realized he couldn't let it go. He had a right to know. And if Emily wasn't going to give him answers, he'd find them himself. The first step was learning more about Mark. On paper, Mark Reeves seemed solid enough. He'd moved to Cedar Falls less than a year ago, rented a loft above the hardware store, and opened a consulting business that nobody seemed to understand but everyone assumed was legitimate, because the man dressed well, drove a Lexus, and carried himself like someone with money. Emily's attachment to him had grown suspiciously fast, almost too fast. Daniel wondered if it had started long before the divorce. With a few favors pulled at the station, Daniel started digging. What he found didn't match the polished image. Reeves had no prior address listed in Ohio, but 2 years back he'd been living in Philadelphia, where he was linked to a financial firm that collapsed under fraud allegations. His name had never appeared in court documents, but it lingered on the edges of police reports mentioned in statements from employees who claimed upper management had disappeared before the collapse. Daniel leaned back in his chair, a cold unease creeping over him. Mark Reeves wasn't just a rebound. He was hiding something. Still, none of this explained the children. The next time Daniel saw Emily was 2 weeks later at the grocery store. She stood in the baby aisle, her hair tied in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. The cart was packed with formula, diapers, wipes, more supplies than one person should reasonably manage. When she noticed him, she froze. Her hand gripped the cart handle like she was bracing herself. "Emily," he said, his voice careful. "Daniel," she replied flatly, though he could hear the exhaustion in her tone. There was a long silence before he finally asked, "How are they?" Her expression softened, if only slightly. "Healthy, growing, non-stop crying, but they are miracles." He swallowed hard. "Emily, I need to know the truth. Are they mine?" Her eyes darted away. "Daniel, please don't." "Don't what?" His voice cracked with frustration. "Don't ask the question that's been eating me alive? Don't want to know if I have 5 children out there who are my blood." Emily's lip trembled. For a moment, he thought she might finally tell him. But just then, Mark appeared from the end of the aisle, carrying a box of formula under his arm. His eyes flicked between them, and a faint smile curved his lips. "Everything okay here?" he asked smoothly. Emily nodded quickly. "Yes, we're fine." Mark stepped closer, his hand brushing Emily's back possessively as he looked at Daniel. "You need to let this go, Officer Harris. The children are mine. Emily has moved on. Maybe you should too." Daniel's fists tightened at his sides, but he didn't say a word. Not in public. Not with people watching. That night, lying awake in his apartment, Daniel made up his mind. He would get a DNA test, with or without Emily's permission. It wasn't easy. Hospitals guarded that kind of information fiercely, and Emily would never agree to it willingly. But Daniel knew people, nurses who'd gone to high school with him, lab technicians who owed him favors after he'd pulled their drunk relatives out of ditches and sent them home instead of booking them. Slowly, quietly, he pulled strings. 3 weeks later, an envelope landed on his kitchen table. Inside were the results of genetic testing on 3 of the 5 infants, swabs collected discreetly by a sympathetic nurse during a routine checkup. Daniel's hands shook as he unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the lines of data until they landed on the conclusion. Probability of paternity, 99.8%. His breath caught, his knees gave out, and he dropped into the nearest chair. They were his. At least 3 of them were his. The ground beneath his life shifted in an instant. The anger, the confusion, the grief, it all tangled together. Emily had lied. She had let him walk away believing he was childless, believing she had built a new life without him. And now, he was a father to 3, maybe 5, babies he hadn't even held since the day they were born. The next day, Daniel went to her house. Emily opened the door with one of the babies balanced against her shoulder, its tiny hand clutching at her shirt. When she saw him, her face drained of color. "We need to talk," he said firmly. Her eyes flickered with panic. "Daniel, I know. Don't bother denying it. I had the test done." His voice was low, controlled, but beneath it burned a rage he could barely contain. 3 of them are mine, Emily. You lied to me. You let me think I had no part in this. Tears welled in her eyes. I was trying to protect them. Protect them from what? His voice rose, startling the baby, who began to cry. From their father? From the man who would have given everything for them. She shook her head, her voice breaking. "You don't understand. Mark isn't who you think he is. He isn't safe." The words hit Daniel like ice water. He stared at her, stunned. "Then why the hell is he in this house? Around my kids?" Emily's tears spilled over, her shoulders trembling. "Because he won't let me leave. Because he knows things about us, about me. If I defy him," she glanced at the baby in her arms, her voice dropping to a whisper, "I don't know what he'll do." Daniel's stomach clenched. The polished stranger with the Lexus, the too-perfect smile, the murky past, it all clicked into place. Mark Reeves wasn't just a rebound or con artist. He was a threat. For the first time in months, Daniel felt something other than despair. He felt a purpose. "I'm not letting him near them again," Daniel said, his voice steady, his jaw set. "He doesn't get to take my children, Emily." He doesn't get to control you. Emily's eyes widened. Daniel, please, you don't know what he's capable of. Then I'll find out, he said, his voice like steel. And when I do, I'll end this. For you. For them. Outside, headlights swept across the driveway. A car door slammed. Mark Reeves was home. Emily's face drained of color, and Daniel felt the tension snap like a loaded gun cocked and ready. The real fight was just beginning. The headlights cutting across the driveway made Emily's breath hitch. She clutched the baby tighter against her chest. Daniel stood rigid in the doorway, every muscle in his body tight as a wire. Go, Emily whispered urgently. If he sees you, hey. But it was too late. The front door opened, and Mark Reeves stepped inside with the casual air of someone who owned the place. His eyes landed on Daniel instantly, and that smooth, practiced smile spread across his face. Well, Mark said, shutting the door behind him, what a surprise. Daniel didn't move. We need to talk. Mark's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by something colder. About what? Daniel's voice was firm. The kids. 3 of them are mine. I had the test done. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Emily's eyes darted between the 2 men, tears brimming again. Mark finally chuckled, shaking his head. Of course you'd do that. A cop always needing proof. Always digging. He took a slow step closer. But so what? Do you think it changes anything? You're not part of this family anymore. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. They are my children. You don't get to erase me. Something dark flickered in Mark's eyes, a glimpse of the predator beneath the polished mask. He looked at Emily. You told him. Emily shook her head quickly. No, I didn't. Then he went behind your back. Mark's smile was gone now, replaced with cold fury. And you let him walk into our house. The baby in Emily's arms began to cry again, the sound slicing through the tension. Mark's gaze hardened, and for a brief moment, Daniel saw something dangerous flash across his expression, something that made his blood run cold. Daniel stepped forward, his voice low and sharp. If you so much as raise your hand at her, or them, I'll end you. Mark laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. You don't know what you're getting into, Officer Harris. You think this is just about a marriage gone bad? About who fathered which child? He leaned closer, his voice dropping. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Emily's voice broke in, trembling. Daniel, please, he's right. You don't know what he's tied to. Mark's head snapped toward her, his glare silencing her instantly. Daniel's heart hammered. Whatever this man was involved in, Emily was terrified enough to stay quiet. Mark straightened his jacket, his smile returning, controlled again. You've had your say. Now get out before I call the station and tell them you're harassing us. Let's see how well it plays when the local hero cop can't accept that his wife moved on. For a moment, Daniel considered lunging at him, putting an end to the smugness with his fists. But Emily's eyes, pleading, desperate, stopped him. She wasn't ready. Not yet. So he left. But he didn't walk away in defeat. He walked away with a plan. Over the next week, Daniel dug deeper into Mark's past. He used every contact he had, scoured every database he could access. What he found chilled him. Mark Reeves wasn't even his real name. His birth name was Marcus Rivers, a man tied to organized crime in Philadelphia. He'd worked as a financial front for a network laundering money through real estate and consulting businesses. When the operation had collapsed, Rivers disappeared, reinventing himself as Mark Reeves. And now he was here, in Cedar Falls, hiding in plain sight, using Emily and the quintuplets as a cover, a way to blend into the safety of small-town obscurity. But there was more. The financial crimes weren't the whole story. Buried in old police files was an open investigation into allegations of coercion, threats, even violence against women connected to him. None had testified in court. The cases had been closed quietly, without enough evidence to convict. Daniel sat in his apartment, the files spread across his kitchen table, rage boiling inside him. Emily hadn't just moved on. She'd been trapped, manipulated, threatened into silence. And now 5 innocent lives were in the middle of it. Daniel went to Emily again, this time when Mark was away. She opened the door cautiously, the babies asleep in their cribs upstairs. The dark circles under her eyes had deepened, but when she saw him, relief flickered across her face. "You were right," Daniel said, stepping inside. He laid the files on the table. "His name isn't Mark Reeves. It's Marcus Rivers. His wanted, more than you know." Emily covered her mouth, her body trembling. "I didn't want you dragged into this. He said if I ever told anyone." "He can't control you anymore," Daniel said firmly. "Not with me here. Not with what I know." Tears spilled down her cheeks. For the first time in months, she looked at him not with anger, but with something closer to the way she used to trust, even love. "Daniel, I'm so sorry. I was scared. For me, for the babies. I didn't know what else to do." Daniel reached out, gently taking her hand. "We'll fix this. Together." For a brief moment, the weight lifted. For a brief moment, it felt like they might find their way back. But the sound of tires crunching on gravel shattered it. He was back. Emily's face went white. Daniel's grip tightened on her hand. "Take the kids upstairs," he whispered. "Now." She hurried, scooping up two of the babies as Daniel darted to the window, watching Mark's Lexus pull into the drive. His pulse hammered. He had no backup, no warrant, no legal grounds. Just his gut, his badge, and the truth. The front door opened, and Mark stepped inside, tossing his keys onto the counter. His eyes landed on Daniel instantly, and his smile vanished. "I told you to stay out," Mark said coldly. "This ends tonight," Daniel replied, his voice steady. Mark's hand slipped casually into his jacket pocket. Daniel's instinct screamed. "Don't," he warned, his hand hovering near his holster. But Mark only pulled out a phone, smirking. "You think you can take me down? You don't have the reach. You're a small-town cop. I've walked away from bigger men than you." Daniel's voice cut like steel. "Not this time. I know who you are. Marcus Rivers. I know what you've done. And I have enough here to bury you." Mark's jaw tightened. For the first time, Daniel saw fear flicker in his eyes. A baby's cry echoed from upstairs, and Mark's gaze snapped upward. His expression hardened. "They'll never be yours, Harris. You hear me? Never." That was the breaking point. Daniel lunged, tackling Mark before he could move. The two men crashed into the coffee table, splintering wood across the carpet. Mark fought with surprising strength, his fist connecting with Daniel's jaw. But years on the force had taught Daniel how to fight dirty, how to survive. The struggle was brutal, raw. Mark reached for something in his jacket, a knife, but Daniel pinned his arm, slamming it against the floor until the blade skittered away. Finally, with a surge of adrenaline, Daniel locked Mark in a hold, his forearm pressed against the man's throat. "It's over," he growled. And this time, it was. The sirens wailed minutes later, lights flashing across the quiet street. Officers swarmed the house, cuffing Mark Reeves, Marcus Rivers, as Daniel stood, bruised and bleeding, but unbroken. Emily descended the stairs slowly, cradling one of the babies, her eyes wide with relief and fear all at once. She looked at Daniel, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You saved us," she whispered. Daniel's chest tightened. For months, he had felt stripped of everything. His marriage, his family, his purpose. But in that moment, standing in the wreckage of their living room with his children crying upstairs, he realized he hadn't lost them at all. He had found them again. Months later, Cedar Falls was quieter. The trial of Marcus Rivers made headlines across the state, his crimes spilling into public record. Emily testified, her voice trembling but strong, finally free of the grip he had held over her. Daniel sat by her side through every hearing, every late night of fear, every step forward. The quintuplets grew quickly, their cries replaced by laughter, their faces revealing more of Daniel with each passing day. The bond between him and Emily slowly mended, not overnight, not easily, but with every shared burden, every small act of trust. One evening, as the sun set over Elmwood Avenue, Daniel stood on the porch holding two of the babies while Emily rocked another nearby. The chaos of 5 infants surrounded them, crying, giggling, tiny hands reaching out. Emily looked at him, her eyes soft. "I don't know what the future looks like, but I know this," she touched his hand gently. "You're their father, and no one can take that away." For the first time in a long time, Daniel smiled. A real smile. the kind that reached his eyes. The past was fractured, painful, but the future, messy, complicated, beautiful, was theirs, and the truth, once hidden in shadows, had finally set them free.